Welcome back to another episode of The Creator Consult, a podcast produced by Scruffy Chandelier Productions, dedicated to the specific crafts and lives behind all creators. From what are your creative pursuits, to what drives you, and how do you improve your craft? This episode is another installment in our mini-series exploring some behind-the-scenes context in the making of the YouTube short series SCP D-Classified. I'm your host, Ryan Murphy, the writer, director, co-producer, videographer, and of course editor for the web series, and joining me once again today is my co-host and series co-producer, Faaiz Saad, who you will also recognize from his starring role as Omar Minhaj in none other than SCP D-Classified. Faaiz, thank you again for joining me today.
Great to be back.
We are getting into this series now. We are here today to talk about SCP D-Classified Episode 4, Just a Shower.
Ooh, this was a fun one.
This was definitely a fun one to make, and I think this was your personal favorite in the series, wasn't it?
I loved this one. This was so much fun to film. Filmed with a good friend. Just a blast to film overall.
For sure, and this was one that I think above all the other ones, definitely leaned into the creepy aspect of the SCP verse. So without further ado, we'll dive right in. Production for Episode 4 took place on July 17th and 26th, 2019. The original article, SCP-1602, A Shower Curtain, was written by Pepper's Ghost on the SCP Wiki. This one was certainly an interesting episode to film because obviously the prop that we used, the shower curtain in and of itself, was a very simple prop to acquire and use. Quick side note, funny backstory with that, the file used to call for a blue shower curtain with little ducks on it that was absolutely impossible to find, and it was in the process of looking for that prop that the official file actually changed, and they made it a lot easier on me. So whoever was responsible for that file change, thank you very much. You made my life so much simpler at that time. But yeah, no, the prop itself wasn't difficult to acquire. The difficulty was in creating this very jarring, creepy scene with a very dynamic movement on both you and Ben's parts in such a confined and small space. And Faaiz, from your perspective as an actor, what was that like? What was different about making this episode?
This episode was different in that, like, to create such a high tense environment, you would think, oh, there'd be a lot of running, there'd be a lot of movement, but we didn't have the luxury of space. So I used what I had available to me, which was this furniture. So you'll notice he starts coming to me and I start backing up and I realize there's not that much space. I start moving chairs and tables and whatever I have in front of me just to, delay him so that we have more time for dialogue to run so we can increase the tension. And B, it's creepy in that he doesn't seem hostile, just seems like some old man. What's this old man going to do to me? But the fact that he's approaching you very slowly, very quietly, and I have this tension, I'm trying to put things in between me, adding all that really adds on the effect. It makes it creepier. It was really fun challenge with the blocking. I think it made it a very unique scene.
And that's really interesting from the actor insight perspective, because on the directing side, the momentum of this scene was really difficult on my end to want to keep up because there was only so slowly that I could ask you and Ben to move within the space that we had before it got to the point that it just seemed completely unnatural and it didn't work.
Right.
But at the same time, I needed you both to move within that small space in a way that your lines would be paced appropriately, and we had the actions that we needed. And so it was a combination of doing what we could on set to pace things the way that we could to slow things down enough. But then also in the edit, there were certainly from some different camera angles, some overlapping action that I cut in to kind of allow us to have more space, but that wouldn't feel jarring in nature when viewing them. So that movement in the space, it's interesting to hear your perspective on that as an actor, because there was a whole different set of challenges on the directing aspect that, compared with other episodes where a lot of times you sit or stand in the same part of the room and your character doesn't have as much dynamic movement interacting with so many different angles within the room, it makes it a lot easier to shoot. And so that was a particular challenge with this episode for sure.
I also think this is a great growing experience for me as an actor too. Just a lot of show, not tell, just expressions on my face and body language and things that, I'm not physically saying, but the way I'm using my body. It was a great challenge and a great fun to be able to do it like this.
For sure. And I think you and Ben really excelled in this episode. And I think the way that the two of you played off of each other really made this episode what it was and really sold a lot of what was occurring between your two characters in the scene.
One side note, Ben is a friend from college. He did a little acting like maybe in high school. I hadn't seen him in like months, and we hung out with each other every day in college. So being able to bring him in to do something that I love and that interaction, that chemistry you saw on screen was our friendship. It's just cool to see all that come together. So it was a blast filming it because I got to see friends and was able to, show that on screen, that chemistry and that connection.
That was really nice, and it definitely boosts morale on set when
Mhm.
people know each other, and
Yeah.
seeing you two play off of each other brought a lot of energy to
Right.
that shoot as well. I touched a little bit on some of the challenges of editing this sequence with the movement in the scene, and I wanted to address really quick one of the comments that I've gotten a lot in person from friends and family and other acquaintances that have watched this episode was questions about the light switch effect that we did. Essentially, where in the backstory for the SCP, where you see one of the entities from behind the shower curtain maybe interacting with Nicholas as the D-Class, and then the light switch flicks quickly and the entity is gone. The way that we shot this, it is incredibly simple. We would have the entity interacting with Nicholas. I would yell, freeze. Everybody would stay as still as they could, get the entity to move up and out of the scene, get Nicholas to remain as still as possible, and then continue on from that point. And I would just edit in the light switch sound effect in
Mhm.
post, insert a couple of quick frames of black as the lights shut off or came
Right.
on. Yeah, it was an incredibly simple effect, but I think from the comments that we've gotten, it achieved what we wanted it to.
It looks so good. I remember watching it for the first time. Right, was that you? Do you outsource this? Is really good.
No, and I appreciate it. And it's funny. It's one of those things that goes to show that sometimes you don't have to do something crazy elaborate or crazy high budget to get an effect that's going to evoke a reaction from your audience. Sometimes it is things as simple as that you just do a little bit of work in post and it all comes together.
No, I agree. Like even your transitions, when you're transitioning on the slide and move to black and cut to a whole different scene, like I said, like we're a small production. If we can do the basics right, it'll make things a lot better. And like with transitions and even like these little effects, Ryan hits them on the nail every time, and that makes a low budget production seem a lot higher than it really is.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. I definitely don't hit the nail on the head every time, but I think we found enough things that worked well. And like you were talking about with bringing in tools like the slider and being able to use some simple frame blocking techniques for
Mhm.
some transitions, that is something that can elevate the level of the production, even though technically it's not super complex to do on
Mhm.
set.
The other big obstacle we had was casting, and in particular, casting Amos. We were talking with another actor before, but we get a lot of help from people out of the generosity of our friends and family's hearts. They help us with our production, some help with acting. But at the end of the day, when you're asking someone to do something for free and volunteering their time, you can't demand that of them. You respect that gift they give you. And there was just an issue the first Amos where his schedule wouldn't work out. So we were lucky that Ben was available and was more than happy to do it. Thank you, Ben. Not even just Declassified, but just any independent short film or low budget thing. It relies a lot on the goodness of other people trying to help you make your project come to life.
For sure. And to kind of go with that, the other thing that you need to realize when you are involved in making a production that is your own creative vision, obviously you're going to be deeply invested in it. When you bring other individuals on board for shorter roles, it's not that they're not invested, but they're obviously not going to be as invested as you. They're going to have other things that are going on in their lives that need to take priority. And when those things come up, it's something that, of course, we don't blame other people for choosing things that are more in line with their goals and their life values. And of course, things going on with family, those come first. And it's something that you need to be prepared for, and you need to understand the motivations of everybody that you're asking to be involved and not get offended by that, and really realize that people have other things that are going to be important to them and that you need to be respectful of that. The other kind of comment to go along with that, we definitely don't want to make it sound like Ben was our last resort. We actually thought about him earlier on too, and just didn't think it was going to be something that was going to be possible. And then it just ended up working out in the end, and it really ended up being the right casting decision. He did a really
Mhm.
great job with the production, and we were really fortunate to have him on board.
Absolutely.
Going along with that, I think it's time that we jump into our top 5 behind the scenes facts for this episode.
All right, I'll start us off. So, fact number one, Nicholas Bolin is the co founder of the Morbid Memories channel and makes his one on screen appearance in this episode as the initial D class testing with SCP 1602. He also serves as the second revealed intercom voice in the same episode.
Yes, and so we knew that we wanted to make sure that Nicholas, at least his voice, was involved in this production for how big he was and how instrumental he was in the founding of the channel. And I know for me, he was the one that got me into SCP in the first place, so I wouldn't have been doing any of this without his influence. And so we had talked about it was going to be hard for him to make it into the state to be involved in the production, so he was going to be the second intercom voice. He ended up being able to come back to Alabama, and we were able to fit him in for the shoot day to be on screen. So we were really excited to be able to have him show his face and be involved on camera as well.
It was a blast.
So going into our second fact, more of a technical filmmaking aspect, a lot of you film buffs out there, of course, will be familiar with the 180-degree rule. And if you were watching episode 4, you will see that this rule was broken with the dialogue between Omar and SCP-1602 posing as Amos. This was actually done on purpose for their dialogue. Real quick to recap for those of you not familiar with it, the 180-degree rule is a filmmaking technique that helps the audience keep track of where your characters are in a scene. When you have two people, such as Omar and SCP-1602, that are facing each other in the same shot, you have to establish a 180-degree angle or kind of a straight line between them, in which case you don't want to cross that line to confuse where their orientation is in space. But in this case, the rule was broken on purpose to have the two occupying the same space in the left side of the frame from shot to shot. This was done for a couple of different reasons. One, as foreshadowing of the kinship between Omar and Amos, but also this way to shoot creates unease within the space, and we wanted this to feel creepy and uneasy.
It's really cool to see this stuff in action. I've been getting more into film and more of the directorial side. I've been working on a screenplay and just really thinking about the shots that I want and the intentional times I do want to break rules. It's really cool to see that in something I've already done.
It's funny after going through film classes and knowing that these are things you stick to, but having to learn when it's good to break those rules, because no rules in film are absolute. And so there's always opportunities to break them as long as you have a purpose for doing so.
That leads us into our third fun fact, which is SCP-1602 Amos's laugh was actually a composite of 4 different takes. None of his laughs by themselves were quite what we're looking for, but when you put them all together, it was something else, man.
I think the other problem with it was we needed the laugh to kind of linger for a while and fade out. And so none of the laughs individually were that long. So splicing them together in the edit and piecing them together to make this kind of one deranged drifting off laugh, I think ended up working pretty well, even though it was different takes placed together.
Right. I got some real serious Joker vibes from that. It was great. It was creepy, man. That was great. It was a great part about it.
Are we talking Jared Leto Joker? Like good Joker? For our fourth fact, due to some audio difficulties, the entire last scene of Omar's audio is actually dubbed in post-production from the point he walks out from behind the shower curtain speaking with the intercom.
If this is your first time listening to the podcast, I'm going to reiterate how much I love audio in film. It is my favorite part, and I cannot say that with any more sarcasm in my voice. Recording audio and doing it in person the first time, that's enough of a process trying to record the audio and make it look good. But when you have lines that you need to deliver, and you need to deliver them in a certain cadence according to something on screen, that's a whole different beast. I think to record a minute of audio via dubbing takes me, 30, 45 minutes versus, the 20 minutes it would take to film the one shot, or even less than that.
Dubbing the audio is rough because you also have to match the emotional level that you were seeing on screen while not peaking your audio in post and trying to adjust it so the audio is going to layer in naturally and have similar sounding cadence to the rest of your voice before. And so it was a lot. And for you to be able to do that and kind of jump into that character and dub in that audio in the end, like you did for several other points in the series, was something that, would not have been our first option to do, but when it was a necessity, you really stepped up to the plate and did a great job with it.
I will say this was one of the easier dubbings we had to do in the series. And I guess talking about my next fun fact, during one of the shots with the struggle, a smartphone was placed on the table in the background and we didn't notice it until the edit. So to avoid a Game of Thrones coffee cup scenario, we had to mask out that phone frame by frame. And when I say we, I mean Ryan. I don't do anything once the camera turns off. And the only remnant we have of that remains in the final cut with a slightly distorted shadow that if you really look, you might be able to see.
Yeah, no, I didn't notice this until actually very close to when the episode was supposed to be going out.
Mhm.
I viewed the episodes over and over again, and I sent the preliminary drafts and the final drafts to you to view as well. We had both watched this episode several times,
Right.
and for whatever reason, a couple of days before it was supposed to go up, I looked at it again and I saw the phone, and I couldn't believe I hadn't seen it when I was editing before. And so I jumped back in and I had to do some masking to edit out the phone frame by frame. And overall, it's pretty seamless. There is, Faaiz mentioned, a little bit of a distorted shadow that if you're really looking for it, you can see it. But that was just something I was glad that I was able to catch before we actually put it out, because it almost pulled a Game of Thrones scenario where it was going to be in the final cut.
Didn't Ben's other shot have his mic showing? And we saw that and we fixed that. And then when we came back, how did we miss this? We had him come back for another day of shooting and forgot that one little phone.
It did, because there was that one shot that we had to refilm where his jacket opened up and you could see the mic dangling from his shirt. And so we caught that one, but somehow the phone slipped by us for a long period of time.
We made it work. And even despite all that, I still think episode 4 is one of the best. At least it's still my favorite.
It's definitely one of my favorites, and I really enjoyed the process of making it, and I think the final cut turned out pretty well. So now, jumping from our behind-the-scenes facts, we do have a quick interview today, speaking with the one, the only, Nicholas Bolin, co-founder of the Morbid Memories channel, and, as we mentioned before, actor as one of the D-Class personnel and the second intercom voice in this episode. Nicholas, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, to start us off, I was wanting to ask, we have been doing readings on the Morbid Memories channel for several years before this project, and a lot of the stories that we've done, of course, have had D-Class in them. After reading about D-Class for so long, how did it feel to take on that role on the screen?
It was a lot of fun. I wasn't really sure how I was going to approach it going in, but I guess that ended up being a good thing. D-Class are just random people thrown in for their crimes, I guess, but more or less random people, and they don't know what they're getting into, and I didn't really know what I was getting into either. I didn't put a whole lot of thought into what I was going to do going in, but just in the moment I tried my best to represent someone who didn't know what was going on or what to expect, and just witnessing the horror of that SCP that we were shooting for that day. But, I enjoyed it.
I think you embodied the role really well. There's one shot in particular where you're seeing the entity behind the shower curtain for the first time, and that look on your face of like the shock and the horror of it before you get up. That's one of my favorite moments in the episode. I feel like you brought a lot of emotion to that moment that was really good.
Also, I'm glad it turned out well, because I didn't feel like I was portraying it very well, but I guess it ended up being better than I thought. It was a lot of fun getting dragged toward the curtain by the SCP. That was probably my favorite part of that episode.
That was a fun moment. I know one moment that we talk about a little bit earlier in the podcast too. A lot of people really latched on to that effect that we did with the light switch when Faaiz, as the entity from the shower curtain, is trying to pull you behind, and then we flick the lights and all of a sudden he's gone and you're the only one that's left. And I was talking about how essentially to accomplish that effect, we just told everybody to freeze. Y'all held in position. We moved Faaiz out of there, and you tried to stay as still as possible. I would imagine that was a pretty challenging thing to try to do.
Yeah, I guess I remember having to sit there for a while, but I just remember you having to fiddle with the shower curtain several times to make sure that it was just right for that cut when he was gone all of a sudden. I guess I had to channel my inner scarer back from my haunted house days, just trying to remain unnoticed and just freeze for a second.
That's right. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because that's an interesting piece of your past, too, that you've had some experience on the other side as a scarer. Just out of curiosity, would you like to share with our listeners kind of where your experience is there?
Yeah, that was a whole lot of fun, because I worked at Atrox Factory in Birmingham, Alabama, and it's quite a production. They have just Hollywood-level makeup and outfits and prosthetics and everything, and it was a lot of fun because I got the joy of scaring people along with I acted a lot growing up just in plays. So it was a lot of fun and something that I look back on very fondly.
That's a cool experience for you to have had, especially with how long you were going back to Aatrox and working with them as a scarer. I would assume that, you're scaring people constantly for a long stretch of time, and you've probably seen a wide range of emotion and response to being scared. Do you feel like in your experience, but I would say more than the average person, of seeing people in absolute terror, do you think that either consciously or subconsciously, did you channel any of that into your performance as somebody being scared rather than being the scarer?
Absolutely not. Because people being scared in real life, to me, does not look anything like it does in film. So I was trying to be much more subtle about it than someone would be in real life. But usually they either lost their mind or tried to play it off as if they weren't scared. Versus when you're filming, you want to capture the subtle facial expressions and the realization of what you're seeing and everything. So ironically, I guess, no, I didn't. I don't feel that I did that.
Interesting. No, that's a good point, because I would imagine you've had some very over the top, real, visceral reactions to you as a nightmarish entity scaring people.
I never got to see the funniest reactions. I feel like I just heard stories about people climbing over the set to get away and tackling people. But I still got some pretty funny ones.
Well, Nicholas, before we wrap up, I would be remiss if I didn't delve a little bit into your other role in the film as the second intercom voice that's speaking with the main intercom voice that we hear in the film, voiced by Caleb. You were the boss behind the scenes that was kind of pulling some of the strings throughout the film. And we ended up having a stand-in for the body that would be that voice, but you being the voice of that person, I'm interested to know, we didn't really alter your voice at all for that role. So it is essentially the same voice that you use for the gray coded reading videos that we have on our channel. We didn't really write anything into the script about that, but just curious, in your own personal headcanon in the Morbid Memories universe, did you feel like that was a separate role, or do you feel like your gray reader and your intercom voice working at the Foundation are canonically one and the same person?
So yes and no. When I first started recording for that episode, I wasn't really thinking about the fact that it sounds exactly the same, so listeners would view it as probably being the same character voicing it. When I'm doing just the reading episodes, I tend to think of it as I'm disguising my voice somewhat in order for the viewer to, I guess, have the impression that I don't want anyone to know who I am. I'm just reading these entries as a more or less anonymous person. And then in the reading for the Declassified episode, I didn't have a name, but I was someone who was definitely out there pulling strings somewhere. So yes and no, I guess there's no reason I couldn't canonically be the same character. But at the time, I kind of felt like they were different.
So it kind of sounds like maybe at least a difference in hierarchy between those two voices within the Foundation.
Right.
Interesting. Well, for anybody out there that was asking that question, there you go. Well, thank you for joining us today, Nicholas. We're going to have you back on the podcast in the future. I feel like there's a lot more that we can talk about with the history of the Morbid Memories channel and starting that and some of the other projects that we've done together. But for focusing on episode 4 of SCP Declassified, thank you for being here, and thank you for your role in this project.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
Once again, this week, we do have a question from one of our viewers that we are going to be answering. This question is from Lapis Time on YouTube, who asks, I'm curious, are y'all friends, or did y'all audition for the parts? Referencing, of course, our cast and crew. And we've kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier in the episode, but Faaiz, would you like to expand on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so we had a lot of help from friends, family, and for some parts we did audition. We had the opportunity to have some people come in and had some options for some roles. But initially when we were rewriting the script, we were like, what is something that is feasible for us to do? And I think not limiting ourselves, but working within our reality, we had to write the script in a way to where, like, we know, for example, Omar. We knew I would play Omar, so we sort of wrote Omar as to how I would react. Some of the ways Omar acts is how I act in real life, and it just makes acting a bit more seamless. But some roles like the guards, just friends we had that were free that week and say, hey man, you free, we'll buy you food. Just come over and hold this gun for us. And then some people like Peyton, we had a few people we were looking at for Peyton. I think we had at least 3 people. But when Peyton came in audition, I was like, no, this is the one. She blew it out of the park. And Daniel, I think, might have been a similar case. I'm not sure about that.
It's funny that you talk about writing characters for specific people, because of course we set out with this production knowing that you were going to play the lead, and so I wrote Omar really to be you and to be an extension of yourself. The only other character that I really wrote for a specific person was Andres, and it actually wasn't intentional. I got maybe a third into writing Andres's parts, and it just hit me that I realized I was writing this for Daniel. And we hadn't asked him about it yet. And so I was just really hoping that he was going to say yes for being on board, since I had unintentionally written this character for him. And luckily he was up for doing it. And we really appreciated what he brought to the table. And kind of a point with that I think is important to mention. You hear all the time that the biggest benefit that you can have in going through film school is the connections that you make along the way and the friendships that you establish. And for me, in pursuing my film minor at UAB, that was certainly the case. Daniel was somebody that I met halfway through pursuing the film minor, and he's just an incredible individual, both on the acting side and on the behind-the-scenes other aspects side of things. Just really knocked it out of the park with the role of Andres in this production, and so it was really great to have him on board.
It was a pleasure to work with him. It was my first time working with him, and he was nothing but professional and really helped elevate our game.
So thank you so much for your question, Lapis Time. I hope that we answered it adequately. If you have a question that you would like to ask us, please feel free to drop your question in the YouTube comments, either on our episode of SCP Declassified or in the comments for this episode of the podcast. We can't promise that we will answer your question on the podcast itself, but at least in writing, we will try to respond to your comments in a timely manner and answer it as thoroughly as possible. But after going through our questions, that really leads us to the wrap up for this episode and talking about, once again, our main learning points. Just trying to share some tips that we learned in the process of filming SCP Declassified for all of you aspiring filmmakers out there. Try to give you a little piece of wisdom to carry forward with you. Faaiz, would you like to start us off again this week?
Actor safety, I cannot say it enough. In the scene where wig-face is pulling Nicholas back, there's a little black thing, some black stand near the door. I almost shattered my ankle on that thing multiple times. It wasn't Fat Ryan's fault or anything. It was just literally me just walking back and keep banging my ankle against that thing because I can't see out of that wig.
That was hard because, part of that by design, the wig was covering your face so you couldn't see. So that kind of created an issue. And I know we were trying to figure out what the monster for that part of the episode would be. And I know you approached me with wig-face. How did you, pull that together?
Going back again, improvisation. You're like, Faaiz, we need a villain. We need something scary. I'm like, all right, cool. So I looked around. I was like, what do I have? I literally had nothing in my apartment. I saw the wig that we're going to use later on. So I was like, all right, so can use this. We'll just flip it around. And then what do I have? So I went into my closet, and my family's Pakistani. And so I have shalwar kameez. And so the pants, I was like, okay, so I can use this. So I took the pants, just roll them up, safety pin them, tie that up, wig on my face. And I was like, if this doesn't work, I know what I got, man.
That was good. And it definitely gave some the Ring vibes with it too that I thought was nice. But yeah, not being able to see out of the wig, I would assume was a challenge for you.
Oh, absolutely. Just relying on all my senses besides sight. A lot of touch, but usually was right at the last moment when I banged my ankle against it.
Can't echo actor safety and staff safety enough. That is something that's very important whether you're filming on an independent film or a big budget Hollywood production. So I think for me, one of my biggest takeaways is really looking at unanticipated setbacks on set. And I think if I had to boil it down to one tip, it would be keep in mind that even the simple things can sometimes become very complex.
Yes.
So, for example, we kind of talked about earlier, the moving in such a small space, but that did incorporate a lot of dynamic action and a lot of dialogue over a period of time that was kind of a bigger challenge to overcome that we knew going into it was going to be a difficulty. Now, other things that I had assumed were going to be very simple turned out to be quite complex. For example, Faaiz, when you were serving as wig-face, pulling that shower curtain in front of you, that was a 16-take shot.
Like I said, I'm not a one-take kind of guy. I'm at least 3 minimum. I literally just had to move Nicholas onto the stage. All right, perfect. Did that. Bang my ankle a few times, whatever. Get him on stage. All right, Faaiz, close the curtain. We're good to go. For whatever reason, like, I don't know if like I moved it too much or if like I wasn't moving it enough. Because granted, I can't see, so I'm like trying to feel the curtain and then like throw it just enough to where it lands in the sweet spot. And I don't know. What was I doing wrong? Do you remember?
Well, and to your credit, that was what I hadn't really thought about. We just thought pulling back the curtain, okay, that's something that basically anybody can do. This should be really simple. But we hadn't thought about that you would be crouched, so you would be in kind of an odd position.
Mm-hmm.
You had a wig covering your face, so you couldn't see. So you grasping the curtain was already a challenge. And then pulling the curtain so that you didn't pull it too far where the back came over and like revealed Nicholas on the other side of the frame or any of that. It was something that in theory, the action was going to be very, very simple, but then it was so much more complex than we had anticipated.
Right.
So that was just one of those funny things. I think the other one that really stands out to me is, that part with you in the shower, trying to shower. You want to talk about some of the difficulty we had with that?
I had to record this shower scene. So let me preface with the first project me and Ryan worked on. It was the very first scene. We had lights all around my room and I'm sitting in my bed in my underwear. And then now to this project, I have to shower on camera. So I don't know what Ryan's trying to gear me up to.
Which, to be fair, for the shower scene, you were clothed from the waist down. But it was just one of those things that I hadn't anticipated that, we knew it was going to be awkward to film it, but I didn't think about how much that was going to take you out of the action to have that going on. So essentially, you showering became a very difficult action as I stood there with a camera and a light pointed at you, and that just
I have a picture of that, Ryan. All right, I'm going to show you this picture, and what we're going to do is he's going to link it in the comments. He's going to put it up on the YouTube channel. Look at this picture and try not to laugh at it. And while taking a shower, tell me you can do that. I guarantee you can't.
Yeah, that is a very awkward thing to be seeing while trying to shower. So, like, this is me dunking on Faaiz here, trying to say that he was doing a really bad job. It's just one of those things that you just don't really think about. And something that can seem really simple can be a challenge. And so incorporating extra time on set to provide a buffer for some of these things that can come up is really important if you're able to do that. And so that's the biggest tip that I took away from the production of this episode. But with our learning points, that about wraps up this episode. Thank you for tuning into this podcast discussing episode 4, Just a Shower. Again, please rate us 5 stars. If you enjoy this podcast on whatever podcast outlet you are listening to, and drop us a like on YouTube. And if you haven't checked out SCP Declassified, go ahead and check it out on the Morbid Memories YouTube channel. We would really appreciate it. And feel free to leave us a comment and say hi and let us know that the podcast brought you to it. We appreciate you listening and all of your support, and we will catch you in the next episode.
See y'all next time.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Creator Consult. Whatever your creative passion, we hope you found some helpful tips and motivating words in this episode and enjoyed our conversation. Feel free to engage with us on social media. You can find the Creator Consult by Scruffy Chandelier Productions on X and Instagram at the Scruffy C. That's at THE_SCRUFFY_C at the Scruffy C. Join the Scruffy Chandelier Productions Discord server to join behind-the-scenes conversations for creators or regarding other Scruffy Chandelier Productions content. You can also join the conversation in the video comments on my YouTube channel. All the links can be found in the episode description below. Now get out there and learn, create, and enjoy your passions. And we'll see you in the next episode of the Creator Consult.